Well, hello everybody, welcome to another video tutorial. My name is Drakulic. In this video tutorial, I'm going to explain you the rigid body constraints, and I'm going to show you how you can simulate a simple pendulum through using a special type of rigid body joint, which is called Hinge. So let me start really quick with my default cube here. I want to place it somewhere over here. I want for this cube to be the pivot point of my pendulum. So I want for this cube to stay still, to not move. So I'm giving it, first of all, the name from over here, pivot. Alright, now I'm shifted duplicated my cube, and I want to make this new copy of the cube to be the rod of my pendulum. So I'm scaling it a little bit, giving it some shape, something like that. Okay, so I'm giving it the name to this copy, rod. Finally, I want to add a UV sphere to my scene. This sphere will be the weight that is going to be suspended from the rod here, and is going to be swinging back and forth in this sense. I want to draw this to you. So back and forth like a pendulum. Alright, so I'm giving to the sphere now the name weight. So let me scale it up a little bit, something like so. When you first set up a physics simulation in Blender, you must have in mind a few basic concepts that I'm going to explain you right away. The first thing you must have in mind is that you must create what we call a rigid body world. So if you go over here to the scene context button, you can see something down here that writes a prompt or a button that writes add rigid body world. So let's click on that. Now we have created a new rigid body world. You can think of this rigid body world as being the space, or better the folder, into which we are going to have all those objects that belong to the group that has certain attributes of Newtonian physics, like they obey the laws of gravity and things like that. So first thing, we want to create this rigid body world, and then through going to the physics side panel here, we want to assign to our objects passive or active attributes. So if an object has a passive attribute, that means that it's going to stay still during the animation. And if we add an active attribute to our object, that means that it's going to fall down due to the gravity and things like that. Actually, you can skip the step of creating a new rigid body world by going and directly select an object and giving to it either an active or a passive attribute. But in our tutorial, I thought it was a good thing to tell you about this process. So now, having selected my pivot object here, I want to make it to stay still, to not falling down due to the gravity. So I want to add to it a passive tag or attribute. Alright? Now for the rod, I'm selecting the rod, and I want to add an active attribute to the rod. The same thing for the sphere. I want to add an active attribute for the sphere as well. So now I have three objects here in my scene, one passive and two active objects. Alright. Next thing, very important that you must have in mind, is that in the physics simulation, there are objects that we call homogeneous, meaning that we consider that their mass is uniformly distributed all over the object. So for those homogeneous objects, the center of mass is located at the same place with the center of geometry of the object. So you want, in the case you are considering that your object is homogeneous, has equal density, you need to place the center of mass at the center of geometry. Now, in Blender's physics simulation, the point of origin shows the center of mass of the object. So I need for this to be, generally speaking, at the center of the geometry of the object. This is what I'm going to do now with the rod. So I'm clicking Shift, Alt, Control C, and I'm placing the origin to the geometry. Alright. Now, do not confuse this pivot point of the object, relative to which we rotate the object, with the pivot point of the joint. Those two pivots are completely different things. So, having said that, now we can go ahead and set up our first hinge here, joint. So you have two ways for doing so. The one way is the shortcut, the quick way. All you have to do is to select the two objects you want to link through the hinge joint constraint, and you click on this connect button in the physics tab here. So what this does is that it creates automatically for you an empty that is going to act like the pivot of your joint constraint. But now, this is the quick way, as I told you. I prefer to show you a more detailed approach. So we're going to add to the scene the empty manually. So let me add to my scene an empty. Before that, I need for my empty to be placed over here, where is going to be the pivot point of the oscillation, of the swinging of the rod. So Shift S, and I'm bringing the cursor to the selected, right? And then Shift A, and I'm adding an empty, and this time select from the pop-up selector here the arrows option. So I need to have an empty that has the arrows visualization. This is very important, and I'm going to explain you why right away. First of all, I have selected my empty. I'm heading over to the empties context button here, and I want to give it some more size so you can better see what's going on here. And next thing I want to do is to go to the physics button and add to the empty a rigid body constraint. Now I'm selecting from this pop-up selector here the hinge type of joint constraint. You can see here we have two fields, object 1, object 2. So Blender wants to know which are going to be the two objects that are going to be linked together through the joint constraint. So for the first object, I'm setting the rod object. For the second object, I'm setting the pivot, the cube here. So now I want to give to my rod, because now it is just in the equilibrium position, as we call it, I need to rotate it and to place it at the initial position so it can start moving, it can start swinging. So I need to rotate my rod not around its own point of origin, of course, but relative to the cursor. So head over down here to this little button and select 3D cursor. So now I can rotate, and let me bring the rod somewhere here so it can freely start swinging. So let me play back the animation and let's see what's going on here. You can see that nothing happens and the rod doesn't move. Why? Because if I select the empty, the local axis of the empty is heading upwards, and that's a very important thing. If you go over here to the hinge constraint for the empty, you can see something down here that says limits Z angle. And for the moment, the important thing is the letter Z. So for the hinge constraint to properly work, we need to set up our empty in such a way that its local z-axis is aligned to the axis that is perpendicular to the plane of oscillation. Otherwise, your hinge joint won't work. Very, very important, that one. So simply put, I need to rotate my MT around the x-axis by 90 degrees, and now I have aligned its local z-axis to the line here, to the axis that is perpendicular to the plane of oscillation. So now I want to go ahead and play back the animation. Let me see what's going on here. Now you can see we have this nice oscillation, all right, as you can see. So we have set up successfully our hinge joint, all right. Another thing you might have noticed is that the rod keeps moving without slowing down. The oscillation doesn't fade out, and its amplitude does not decline. Why? Because we don't have any friction or any resistance that could make it to slow down. So if you want to set up a realistic oscillation, you have to take this also into account. How you can do it? All you have to do is to add to your scene a force field, let's say a field wind. Now let me bring the wind field, force field here, rotate it a little bit around its local axis and give it some more strength maybe. Now this force field, it interacts with the rod and it gives to the rod, to the space actually, the resistance, the air resistance that is going to make the rod to slow down and to come down to a still after a while. So please just have this in mind. It's very, very important. Now let me quickly delete this force field here, and now I want to show you yet another interesting thing. If I select my MT, you can see here we have in the physics hinge constraint panel, we have something that says limits z angle, and this is for constraining the amplitude of the oscillation between two given limits. But these limits can be tricky. So let me go to the first frame of my animation. I want to enable this limits angle, and I want to tell you beforehand that those angles here, all right, lower and upper, are relative to the axis of symmetry of the rod. Every object has an axis of symmetry. So let me draw you the axis of symmetry for the rod at this initial position. This is the one. So now the lower angle here, the lower limit with the negative values, corresponds to this angle over here. So let me draw that for you. This one. This is the angle. Whereas the upper angle with the positive values corresponds to this angle over here. So something like that. So you must have in mind these angles are relative, are measured relative to the axis of symmetry at the initial position of our object. So now if I play back the animation, you can see that the rod gets here at this position and stops because I have given to it a lower limit of -45. If I set this to something really low, something like -70 maybe, and play back the animation, you can see now that my rod comes here and stops. So now the angle is that one, this one. I'm going to draw you the angle is between the axis of symmetry of the object of the initial position, at the initial position, and the new position of the object. So that's the angle. Very important, that one as well, so please have this one in mind. Okay, now let me uncheck this limits z angle really quick. And now you can see we have Also, two other buttons that are very important as well. We have a breakable button. Let me click on that. And you are presented with a threshold slider here. I'm going to explain you what this does right away. First of all, this button allows you to make your joint, your hinge joint, to be breakable, meaning the joint can break depending upon the mass or the weight of your object. So a quick and dirty way for calculating the mass of any object is by getting over here, let me select the rod, and you have over here in the physics tab a calculate mass utility. Before that though, I want to show you something. Let me select the rod and let me go to the physics context button for the rod. You can see here it's the mass of the, you can see the mass of the rod at the moment. It has the value of 1. If I go ahead and click on this calculate mass button, you are presented with a huge variety of materials, and depending upon the material you choose, you select, the mass will get calculated. So let me select a really heavy material like iron maybe for my rod. You can see now, if you take a look over here in the mass slider, you can see that the mass of the rod has changed, and it's really very heavy. Alright, now, so if I now play back the animation, you can see that the joint is breaking, whatever. Alright, and this is because it cannot stand the heavy weight of the rod. So now you have a threshold slider here, and so by giving to it a bigger value, you can make the joint stronger, but yet again, for that heavy object, you need to give it a very high value. Let me try now with 3000, you can see, and still it breaks. So you can play around with the slider, and the higher the value, the stronger the joint will become. Alright, now another thing I want to show you, very important. Let me uncheck this breakable option here for the moment. So I want to show you this button, what this does, overwrite iterations. By default, the rigid body world is calculating the steps of the simulation with a certain calculating, if you prefer, resolution, where you can override this default resolution by clicking on this button here. Now, by adjusting the slider here, the iterations, and by giving it a higher value, you can make the joint to be stronger, and at the same time your simulation to be more accurate in terms of physical accuracy. So now by default it's set to 10. You can set it, let's say, to something high, let's say something like 50 maybe. Alright, now we have a better accuracy, we have a stronger joint, but this at the cost of time. It takes more time for Blender to calculate the steps of the simulation. That's what this override iteration does. Let me uncheck this really quick. Now, what about attaching to this rod the sphere? So, next thing I want to do is to create a second rigid body joint here, which is going to be again a hinge, and I'm going to attach the sphere, the weight here, to the rod. Alright? So, for me to do so, I want to first select my rod, click Alt-R so I can reset the rotation, and Alt-G so I can reset the location of the rod. And I want to bring my rod somewhere here. Alright, now I'm going to be using the second method for assigning the constraint, the shortcut method. So I'm selecting first the sphere, shift selecting the rod, and now I'm clicking on this connect button over here. Now Blender has created automatically for me the new rigid body constraint. You have some options here. You can select the type, and we'll set the type to hinge, of course, And then you have some options for the location of the new empty. So you can set it in the middle of the origins of the two objects, or you can set it to the selected object, which is the first one you clicked, or you can set it to the active object, which is the second one you clicked. So you can see now, active object, my new empty appears now here. But this doesn't matter too much because we are going to place it to change the position right away. So now I'm selecting the new empty, and its z-axis is heading upwards, as you can see. So we're going to fix it in just a moment. So let me place it somewhere here where it should logically be the pivot point of the hinge for the sphere, around which the sphere should start swinging back and forth. So next thing I want to do is to align its z-axis. As you remember from before, I need to rotate the empty around the x-axis by 90 degrees, and now I have aligned its z-axis to the axis that is perpendicular of the swinging oscillation of the sphere. So now let me play back the animation and let me see what's going on here. I forgot to tell you that, as you can see here, we have in the physics button for the empty, we have already automatically set up a new hinge constraint with the rod and weight objects assigned to it. Alright, let me play back the animation. So I want to bring first my rod to the initial position. Alright, so I'm rotating it relative to the cursor. I'm bringing it somewhere here. You can see that the sphere doesn't follow. So if I play back the animation now, you can see we have some weird results. Of course, we're not going for that kind of result. And the reason for that is that when you set up a joint between two moving objects, you have first to set up a hierarchy. And I'm going to show you how to do this right away. So let me stop the animation. Let me undo my rotation of the rod. Now, because the two objects are moving, you have to create a hierarchy. You have to select the sphere, the weight object, plus the new joint object, and you want to parent them to the rod object. So Control P, and I'm parenting it to the object. Now, as I'm rotating the rod object around the upper hinge object, around this pivot point, you can see that both the sphere and the empty are following along. So if I now play back the animation, now you can see that the sphere is making this strange, it has this strange behavior. And the reason for that is that if you click on the sphere, you can see that it has the convex hull here type of shape. Well, but at the same time, the rod, as you can see, if I go to the first frame of my animation, the geometry of the rod is penetrating the sphere. So this might lead to some strange results. So in that case, it's better to use as a type of shape the mesh option. So it's much more accurate and physically correct. So let me set the same for the rod, and let me play back the animation. Now you can see we have a much more realistic, if you prefer, simulation. So I hope I have shown you how you can take advantage of the very powerful rigid body constraint functionality in Blender. Through using it, you can create some really interesting complex systems that are based exclusively on the physics module of Blender. This functionality can save you a whole lot of time and effort if you set up properly your systems. So don't forget to take special care about the orientation of the axis. That is a very important thing in certain amongst those joints. Also, do not forget, if you see some weird results going on, don't forget to parent any moving objects to those objects that should be following logically in the real world. Also, do not forget to link the joins, the empties, to those objects. Finally, if you see again some weird results going on, don't forget to check the rigid body collisions type of shape that you have assigned to your object. Remember, the mesh collision shape is the most accurate one, although it takes more time to get calculated. Alright? So, having that said, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and I hope that you learned something from this. If you like this tutorial, don't forget to subscribe. See you next time with a hopefully interesting topic. Hopefully soon. Until then, have fun and goodbye.